I grew up in France. My grandma, she would put a timer. If we stayed like more than 2 minutes in the shower, she would cut the hot water. So,
my mom used to make us turn off the shower in between, like, you're washing your hair. She would turn the water off while we washed our hair, and then you turned it back on when you were ready to rinse it. But that was more like environmental consciousness. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. Today's guest is Dr. Elsa Jungman. We will be talking a lot about microbiome-friendly skincare, the microbiome. I'm your host, Jennifer Cookson. As an introduction, Dr. Elsa Jungman has made significant contributions to the fields of skin health and microbiome innovation. With a PhD in skin barrier function, she has an extensive background working with leading companies such as L'Oreal, K18, and HelloBiome. Dr. Jungman's research into the skin microbiome led to her to recognize it as the future of consumer health and beauty industry, inspiring her to start her own company focused on leveraging microbiome data to drive innovation in consumer solutions. In late 2020, she launched her namesake pioneering microbiome-friendly skincare line, followed by a unique direct-to-consumer microbiome test kit in retail outlets such as Credo, and with the facial bar Face House. By 2022, Dr. Jungman introduced HelloBiome, a B2B AI platform collecting microbiome data for clinical research and personalization. HelloBiome's ambition is to develop data-backed predictive models to bring new innovations to market in the beauty and consumer health industry. HelloBiome is the 2024 Probiota Pioneer winner, and Elsa's contributions have been recognized with the French-American Entrepreneurship Award. Additionally, she is the editor of the 5th edition of the Handbook of Cosmetic Science and Technology, further establishing her as a leader in her field. She currently lives in San Francisco with her young family. Welcome, Elsa.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me.
So our paths crossed, I think, at Mother Dirt, which was my first introduction to the skin microbiome. But for you, you had an event early in your life that really shaped your perspective on the microbiome. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into the space?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, when I had that event in my life, it was a medical event that happened when I was just 18 years old. I suffered from a toxic shock syndrome. It's a bacterial infection that actually made my skin very sensitive as a secondary effect. I mean, when they treat you for a toxic shock syndrome, what they want is to keep you alive first and make sure you don't lose any members. I was lucky. Antibiotic worked really well for me, but I think the consequence of receiving all those extremely strong treatments is that I started developing extremely dry, sensitive skin and other dermatological conditions that were like a lot of itchiness and some really bad problem, which was a hard time in my life. I was finishing up high school and I had to take all my final exams. So it was not great timing, but I think this kind of developed to me like a curiosity towards skin. Mm-hmm. As a teenager, I was really into, makeup, fashion, but realizing that your skin is actually an organ and that it can react and affect your life so much, whether it's like socially or medically, is like, I think really generated that curiosity. And that's why I ended up pursuing my career. Like first I studied biology, biochemistry, and then I specialized early on in skin physiology. And I became an expert on the skin barrier function, where the microbiome didn't exist at the time, guys. They would tell you.
Yeah. Was that even part of the curriculum? Was that on the radar yet?
One slide. So I was in France. When you do a PhD, you do first your master degree and then you do your PhD. During my master degree, I remember it was at the University of Lyon, who was the only master degree in skin physiology in France. There was one slide from a professor with like one graphic and they explained, there's the skin flora. It's here for like low pH of the skin. And that's all we said. We never use the word microbiome or microbiota. We would say flora. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And I had some microbiology class when I was in my undergrad, but we never linked it to us human. We would study, like for like contamination or more like security or like the living organism, but we never linked it to the human ecosystem at the time. It was like not even crossing our minds. Yeah.
And I think the the microbiome still remains to be a pretty nascent technology in terms of in cosmetics, but just doing a quick Google search, there are a lot of emerging products that are centered towards a microbiome claim or microbiome. For those listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, can you give us just a brief 101 on what the skin microbiome is and what it does and how it's important to overall skin health?
Yeah, I mean, if you've never heard of the microbiome, that's almost normal, I would say. I'm sure you've heard maybe of probiotic for like gut supplement, and that's the microbiome. It's actually probiotic or live bacteria. And what you have, the only thing you should remember is that you're actually more bacterial than you are human. We are composed of trillions of microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, even viruses that are here to kind of keep us healthy. And it's both like inside our body, constituting all our organs, but also on our skin, being part actually of our skin function. And today, like you said, Jennifer, it's like revolutionizing the field of research, medicine, and even cosmetic, food, nutrition, like everything that comes into contact with us human, because the way we used to think about, treating a disease before, we would like attack it with like strong antibiotic and stop here because we didn't know there was this ecosystem to regenerate or to take care of. And now it's, I think that's now the focus has shifted, like first, like in food nutrition, we've seen it first. Now it's starting in medicine and it continued also in cosmetic, and we see it even like in oral care. It's going to revolutionize all the field of things, product, treatment that touch the human body.
And today we'll just be touching upon the skin microbiome, but given the expansion or the knowledge base that's already exists in terms of the microbiome in the gut or oral care, how interconnected are all of these systems, your gut, oral, skin, the microbiome?
We still know very little about it, but the research that's coming out shows that there is what we call, for example, the gut-skin axis, that if you suffer from certain type of skin condition, like rosacea, for example, it's often linked to your gut inflammation that is linked to actually your microbiome there, and that will also be represented on your skin microbiome surface. So everything is interconnected. It's linked to your immunity, the inflammation marker that will end up showing up as biomarker also on your skin surface. So it's not just about, like, even if we will talk a lot about cosmetic, we have to make it very clear that it's not just about changing your cream, it's a holistic approach we need to have when it comes to microbiome.
And in thinking about topical cosmetics, I know when I used to do color cosmetics and color matching, it's a very repetitive process of applying to your forearm, looking at the color, shade matching. And it was at that time that I started developing eczema on my arm where I was applying. When we think about dysbiosis and the skin microbiome, for consumers, why does it matter? And what are these manifestations that someone might see if they apply something that, and what is happening to actually have something like an inflammatory skin disease occur?
Yeah, I think that's so important what you just brought up from your personal experience, because when I used to run a consumer brand, I saw it in influencer, like from anyone who's like using a lot of product for their work, for their social representation. The problem is that we tend to forget that the skin is our body's largest organ, that it's covered of microorganisms. So even if it's cosmetic, it's not drug, it's going to be like microaggression from your skin every day that are going to happen. And like you, and I had the same experience when I was developing a cleanser. Even though they were very gentle, I developed like terrible rosacea and sensitivity to cleanser a few years ago. I could not even try anything. I would like turn red, and it was so uncomfortable. So it's very, very important when it comes to your skin, even if it's just about trying a new makeup or like trying a new serum or a moisturizer, be extremely mindful when you do that, because it can actually trigger some condition like you've described, like if you're prone to have like eczema, atopic dermatitis, or if you're prone to have like rosacea or psoriasis or just skin sensitivity, the product you use every day can be a big trigger into that. And we tend to not know about that. And I think it's very important to educate that anything you do to your skin, whether it's taking a shower, cleaning your face, or even, washing your children, all of that has an impact on our ecosystem.
Yeah. And not to fearmonger, but, we were just talking about how I'm developing a cleanser, and obviously
Yes.
I I'm somebody who's going to use it to understand the performance. And I am nearly 40 and I'm starting to break out because of how much cleansing I have been doing. And when we think about that topical application, is it that we are changing the ratio of, let's say, a certain strain of bacteria? Is it that we're, removing nutrients? What is that dynamic that might cause your skin to become, let's say, inflamed?
Yes. So, for example, talking about non-disease skin, just like healthy skin, what our data is showing in our research and also what we've seen in scientific publication recently is that if you have like a young, balanced skin, especially as women, we produce sebum, which is good because it keeps our skin moisture. And sebum is going to be the food for certain good bacteria on your skin, like Cutibacterium acnes. What we are seeing is that as we age, or depending on certain type of product we use, our skin tends to start drying out, meaning that we are going to produce less sebum. And for example, in menopause, it's linked to the drop of estrogen production that is quite dramatic, causing like extreme dryness in some women. And this dryness, this lack of sebum production is going to significantly decrease the presence of Cutibacterium acnes. And what I think that could be happening, a theory could be that you have less of those bacteria, Cutibacterium acnes, that in a healthy skin should represent, I believe, between like 60 to like over 90% of your skin surface microbiome for the face. But if you start losing it, you have other type of bacteria, microorganisms that are going to take over. And some of them can be, for example, linked to like atopic dermatitis and other type of sensitivity that I think are like triggering. And it's interesting we're talking about cleansing because there's a famous dermatologist called Dr. Skopnicki. In her book, Beyond Soap, she described like the first thing, like cleaning, like the first step of like the destructive cycle for your skin.
Yeah.
Because you get rid of sebum, you tend to dry out your skin. And maybe this is what's happening. Then we develop those dysbiosis because we are losing those good bacteria that are here to keep the skin balanced and have other ones that start taking over that are more linked to like inflammation and other skin issues.
And I'm not sure when that publication came out, but do you also think that maybe the chemistry or not necessarily the chemistry, the composition of our cleansers have changed? So, the increased use of more, permanent makeup, so long wear makeup and things, it's not just a simple surfactant formulation anymore to remove that, or increased pollution in the environment. Do you think that changing lifestyles, climate, as well as that composition has also maybe contributed to an increase in this skin inflammatory diseases?
Yes, I think there are several things that you're describing. Like the first thing is the season. There are certain parts of the year, if you live in an area that has different seasons during the year, where your skin is going to be way more sensitive than over. For example, winter, if you live in an area where winter can be dry and cold and windy, this
like
is
Boston.
The worst time for your skin, like Boston, I guess. San Francisco, I have a bit less that issue, but in Paris, it was the same. Or when I tend to travel back to like the East Coast in the winter, like my skin not used to it anymore. And that's the time where you should be extremely, extremely gentle with your skin. Use like very moisturizing product. Try to really minimize the cleansing or use extremely gentle cleanser. Yep. The other thing, like you've described, I think is the lifestyle. And I experience it myself. The way I choose my mascara, for example, is the one that I can remove with a very gentle cleanser or just a simple oil.
Yeah. Because
some mascara, like some waterproof mascara, the thing is that you have to rub your skin, apply 10 different type of cleanser to get rid of it. And then I'm super sensitive to that and I'm going to develop some irritation. And I think the other problem is that we were educated to be too clean, which was, I grew up in France. My grandma, she would put a timer. If we stayed like more than 2 minutes in the shower, she would cut the hot water. So,
my mom used to make us turn off the shower in between, like, you're washing your hair. She would turn the water off while we washed our hair, and then you turned it back on when you were ready to rinse it. But that was more like environmental consciousness.
Yes, I guess in France, people didn't want to spend money. They were very careful and everything was super expensive. So we were like French people originally, we didn't wash that much. It was not in the culture so much. I think now it's shifted toward, like we've seen in the US, having to be very clean, to smell very good. to wash several times a day. Like I would talk to some influencer or some people in our community before, and they told me their skin was red, but they were like working out several times a day. Yeah. And they were washing with soap every time their face, skin, which I think was like triggering more reaction. And for example, if you have an oily skin, you tend to think I need to wash my skin a lot, but actually oiliness is a sign of irritation. So the more you wash, the more you're going to produce oil. So it's all about balance. And the advice I always have is that if you suffer like that from like skin irritation, skin sensitivity, to try to step back and reduce whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. And just observe for like 2 days if your skin is worse or not. And most of the time, like irritation is being decreased if you kind of stop washing harshly your skin and being just a bit more mindful about what you do. But it goes against how we were, often taught about.
Yeah. That's not dissimilar to when people have food allergies, right? It's really to like slowly introduce different categories of food. So the approach to skincare would make sense. How can we start to think about also the impacts of products that are maybe not directly meant for the skin? So I often think about conditioners and shampoos. When you're using them, they're meant for your hair, but you're washing them off and they will get on your body. Have you started to see any emerging trend in terms of people really wanting to focus more on microbiome safe hair care or things that are not put on the skin like mascara?
Yes. So actually, it's funny what you mentioned about the wash, because on skin sensitivity, a lot of the facial sensitivity can come from your shampoo.
Okay.
That's what dermatologists are saying, especially if it's like on the forehead and certain areas. So often also try to change your shampoo. But like you said, I think that it's when it comes to conditioner, it seems to be less of an issue unless you really sit it on your body. The best is like to keep your hair up if you have long hair. But we are seeing like a trend also towards understanding, for example, the scalp microbiome, because this is an area that was very unknown. And what we see is really fascinating, because we start seeing markers regarding of like scalp condition, geography, ethnicity, hair type, that are really driven by the microbiome. Okay. And it's great because it's a really non-invasive way to be able to sample and see what's happening. And when you use certain type of product or treatments, how is that actually affecting your microbiome? But yes, you have to think like, if you go and get a strong bleaching, I don't think this is really helping your microbiome at all, and how do you counterbalance all the effect of like certain things you're used to do routinely, but that maybe are not really good for your scalp health.
Yeah. And when we talk about the microbiome, there is a lot of interpersonal differences. So mine is going to be very different than yours, but there are some, general areas that have similar composition. What are those areas? I know, I've worked on the axillary before. There's the oral, there's kind of the sebum-rich areas, but even is there not a microbiome that's related to kind of the eyelids versus the décolleté? Is that called? Or
décolleté, yes.
Yeah.
I think any body area will have its own ecosystem and signature, in the sense that the microbiome is also often driven by the exposure to the outside. Like me, for example, if I look at my armpit, it's like an area that's in my covered by clothes. But if you look at my cheek, I'm not wearing any tissue or mask right now, so it's going to be exposed to the environment a lot. Some area like the armpit, like you said, or like area that are like very watery. But my face or like my back or even scalp has a lot of sebum. It contains a lot of sebaceous gland that some area of the body, like the feet, won't contain. But feet, you have your socks, you have your shoes. So it's another type of environment that is being created. So all of that, first the biology of the area, if it contains what type of gland it's going to contain, then how it's going to be exposed, and which part of the body is going to have a huge impact on the ecosystem, because it's going to be different type of microorganism that can survive those areas, that can be developed there and find the food to thrive for them. So that's why it's going to be very, very different signature. For example, in the armpit, we see very little fungi. We see a lot of bacteria. But if you look at scalp, it's actually almost more fungi than bacteria. So all of that are very different microbial signature that you have to understand when you study the microbiome, because you could be scared, like, wow, what's going on here? But It's about understanding what is supposed to be the baseline of such an area before making any conclusion.
Yeah. And I know I've mentioned this, I believe, in a conversation with you before, but before early on in the days when I was in high school, people believed that dermatologists specifically that, all Cutibacterium acnes was bad. And so it really was an approach to just get rid of all of it. And, a little bit into what you said in terms of the scalp, right? It's not all the fungus on the scalp that's bad. There's certain strains of Malassezia that maybe are a little bit more virulent than others, causing the things such as dry scalp or dandruff and itchiness. I ask about the different areas of the body because I'm curious to hear from you in terms of when we talk about, okay, let's take a step back and do a simple routine. It seems like you can't necessarily create one product that will work for all body types because of those differences. And so that's a little bit inverse of simplicity, but what do you, when you are working with brands and they want to develop something for, a certain area, kind of what is the advice that you give or ways that you approach product development for very specific types of applications?
Yes. So when it comes to product development, before into getting into something really personalized to the microbiome, I believe there are 3 steps you have to take. The first one, if you're doing, for example, a whole body product, whether it's a body soap, a body moisturizer that, yes, maybe you'll use it in the armpit, sometimes on the face or overall, it's not going to be rebalancing those areas necessarily. However, there are certain steps you can take in the product development to make sure that it's going to be really respectful of the overall microbiome. And this actually is the same as formulating for sensitive skin. The first one is to minimize or even ideally eliminate preservative. If you can do that with your formula, there are ways to do it safely now in product development, whether it's about sterilizing the product or using anhydrous formulation or taking some preservative system that has been proven to be less impacting the microbiome. The second is about, I think, the emulsifier you're using, like we've described in cleanser. There are some type of emulsifier that are much more gentle and respectful of the skin barrier than other type of emulsifier. It's also about the concentration. Mm-hmm. So that's another point to look at. And the third one, I would say it's about the unnecessary ingredients, like especially fragrance. I'm not a big fan of fragrance personally. I live a fragrance-free life now. But I think if this is the first thing even dermatologists recommend to not use, on babies or children. So why would we do it on us adults? Unless you really like a certain scent, if you can skip it, that's even better. So this is the free part. Then when it comes to, like you said, the body area, to do something more targeted to a certain, face, armpit, foot, whatever, is about understanding the baseline of that area, what are the good and bad bugs that are living there in order to create formula that will really respect that balance. It's a bit more difficult to do, but now we understand what type of bacteria like to use as food, like prebiotic, for example. If an important bacteria is living on a certain area, we now can understand also what metabolite it's producing in terms of lipids, peptide, and so on, to kind of make sure you have those ingredients present in the formula. And the first steps, if you go even further, which is what I'm focusing on in my research, it's about understanding how we are all different in terms of microbiome and what are the patterns we observe. If we take, for example, dry skin, we are maybe I'm a bit older than you, Jennifer, but maybe we're a bit in the.
I don't know.
I just turned 40, so.
Okay, I am 40, so not just turned.
I thought you were younger.
Good skin microbiome, I guess. No?
Yes. But it's about understanding for people who have similar skin manifestation. Let's say maybe we both feel like our skin tends to be a bit dry and reactive. Yeah. Maybe we have different type of microorganism involved in those type of manifestation. And it's about understanding what are the main microbiome pattern that can exist. Because then if you understand that Jennifer, who has dry skin type A, maybe has more of that bacteria A, and me, Elsa, I have dry skin type B because it's mostly fungi B that tends to create those reactions. Yeah. Then you can do even more targeted formulation, but that requires, I would say, more R&D work to really understand it and then test it both in vitro and clinically to understand what is going to happen. And that's really how I like to approach the product development when it comes to personal care and beauty.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. You know, things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
So in going back a little bit to the preservatives, I know at Mother Dirt, that was, always the first question was, well, how can you create this product without preservatives and it still be safe? And do you feel as if, as an industry, so the gold standard, right, for testing product safety is a preservation efficacy test where you look at the log reduction of some, representative strains and fungus. Is that too rigorous in terms of, that the decline that you need to see in terms of, the kill rate? Can we use preservatives in products to have them be safe, but maybe at a lower use level so that they don't impact the skin microbiome?
I think the issue is that as a product manufacturer, you have to be very careful of the safety of what you put to market.
Yeah.
And I kind of understand that there is like this requirement for like strong challenge test and all that, because once it's on the shelf, you have to make sure that there won't be mold in there. And we've heard a lot of, news every day about those big brands, who still have those preservating issues. I think what's good is that I feel like the industry manufacturer are like really progressing towards that. For example, if you have an anhydrous product, if you don't have water, like test your water activity to make sure that you indeed have such a low water content that nothing can technically grow there. So you don't need preservative test in that case.
Yeah. And just for the audience that's curious, I believe it's about 0.3, right? The water activity.
Oh, I forgot the number. Yeah. It's because you have to do it even if you're using just oil, just do it to be safe. Like I would always run it. It's a very cheap test that is very quick to do. You find a lot of third party labs who can do it for you. Mm-hmm. So really just do it for the peace of mind and for your user to make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
And then there are ways you can actually decrease your preservative, concentration, or like using like more gentle one by kind of playing with the ingredient. By even if you have to use water, try to use, as little water as you can in the formula and use like ingredient like glycerin, for example, that can inhibit that water activity. So when you run your challenge test, I believe theoretically you can use even less preservative concentration to still get a good protection of your formula.
Yeah.
And but it's very important. Yeah. I would say one thing as a product developer where I run into issue is that I would see an interesting ingredient, a ferment or something, and then I ask for the SDS file to the ingredient manufacturer, and often it contains unnecessary preservative or ingredients that are not good for the microbiome.
Yeah.
And some manufacturers are open and they're okay to give you just like the powder extract, or they will use glycerin or another ingredient to kind of skip what they were using. But it's important to look at that because sometimes you formulate and it's too late when you realize it contains other ingredients you didn't know were there. That's very important.
And going into the ingredients, are there not, though, oils that also have pretty strong antimicrobial activity? So when we think about avoid preservatives and maybe, that means avoiding aqueous formulations, there are oils too, and especially in the essential oil area
Yes.
that can be strongly antimicrobial. Something that was challenging in some research that we were doing in terms of high throughput was that evaluating oils within the in vitro models for, if you're looking at a consortium of bacteria strains, it's very difficult to screen oils because it's difficult to solubilize them and understand that. And so what is your recommendation in terms of when looking at oils that might be compatible? Because there is not a tremendous amount of data out there on kind of what ones might be more respectful than others to the skin microbiome.
Yeah, I speak from my experience when developing product. I've spent like hours and hours of just doing literature research.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was using castor oil.
Okay.
And if you read castor oil, they'll tell you it's not, it's killing bacteria, but then you have to read why are they saying it's killing bacteria. If I remember correctly, in the case of castor oil, it was more because of like, not that it will instantly kill. It was more like an issue that if you had a high quantity and it would sit, it could like slowly kill the bacteria, but not let them, develop. Okay. So it really depends. You have to read and then first do your literature research, and all that research for every single ingredient you use. I think we have no other choice than doing it until there are software, that can do it for you quickly, but we don't have that for the microbiome yet.
You're developing it though, right?
We are, yeah. I mean, we still need to collect the data because what we're trying to do is understanding the impact of ingredient on the microbiome. Mm-hmm. And we have to also create some new in vitro model to do it at even a deeper level. So it's going to take some time. Yeah. But hopefully, like not just me, but over, labs or, are doing that because I think it's much, much needed. And the other thing is that I would always recommend in your product development process, like, first, you always need to work with biologists because the issue is that often cosmetic chemists are like excellent at creating beautiful formula, but they are not necessarily biologists. Yeah. And so they won't less understand the impact it can have on the skin biology or skin microbiome, and working with experts on that field at the beginning is important. And then to have some budget to do, you can do a first in vitro screening to see, like you said, if it kills everything or not, at least to see what's going on in a plate. And then moving forward, if you can afford it, to do some clinical testing to see if there is like a change of microbiome balance when people use your product.
Yeah. And do you feel that we've gotten to a point as a science of being able to do that in vitro test and saying if it kills by X amount, it's still quote unquote friendly? What are the metrics that you have started to establish or recognize in the work that you're doing when you think about, okay, something is microbiome friendly or not? Obviously if it kills everything, that's not good, but could it be that it kills half or 25% and the microbiome is resilient enough that it will increase? What are some of the constraints in terms of the in vitro assay, as well as those guidelines that you're starting to see in patterns with the research that you're doing?
I think the in vitro assay are important to be here today because at least it gives you an idea if it's killing everything or not before putting that on your body. But I think where the effort needs to be put today, and this is where actually I'm going to shift my research towards too, is how to create some in vitro model that are really linked to clinical data. And that's, I think, where there's a big gap for microbiome.
Yes.
So that's why my focus is like, now that we have clinical data, we have those clusters, how can we transfer those clusters into an in vitro ex vivo model to understand what's going on and then put it back to clinical to be able to screen at scale and cost effectively like hundreds, thousands of ingredient formula, and to have an idea of what could be the prediction clinically. And I think that's where probably the microbiome industry is kind of shifting now, because there are a lot of like labs company working on great, I believe, in vitro model because they need to be there. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of company, like doing like those data collection, but how do you merge them both and create like a bridge to be able to connect the dots together and do better prediction? And yes, and so hopefully it will be a software who will tell us, oh, you want to formulate that way, this is what's your target, and will formulate for you, for that specific microbiome. But we still need to do some research before being there.
For sure. In the research that you're doing, when you're looking and evaluating a product, obviously there's going to be a persona, right? This is going to be for 35 to 40, yes, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of groups and diversity, they recently came out with a study that they believe humans go through, 2 dramatic aging processes
yes.
in their life, right? I'm curious to hear if you've noticed the same in terms of the skin microbiome. Obviously, you've mentioned that as we age, it does change the chemistry. But in terms of radical shifts in the skin microbiome, do we see those on a pretty, succinct timeline, or is there just too little known right now?
Yes, I think we've seen that shift regarding aging in women. We have mostly data on women, and that's where we saw the shift with the dramatic drop of like Cutibacterium acnes.
Yeah.
And that what's great is that we are not the only one who saw that. It has been described by over literature, and we all found kind of similar patterns when it comes to facial aging. What's interesting to see is that when we looked at face microbiome, we haven't seen like drastic change in terms of like ethnicity for people living in the same geography. But when it comes to scalp, for example, ethnicity or hair type are going to have an impact on the scalp microbiome. So it's very important when you design your study to understand what is known about that area, to make it as inclusive as possible, and to be able to see the right changing. And like you said, I think if you want to do like clinical research on a product, understanding your target demographic is extremely important, because you could test on people from like 20 to 80 years old and all gender and all geography. But the problem, if you do that, is that you're going to see a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Because it's very different profile. But if you want to study on a dry skin type A and you are going to recruit only women in their 40s from like all ethnicities, living in like, let's say in the US, you have more chance to see like better signal than just trying to be too wide in your recruiting process. And that's something we try to educate consumer brands about, even when you develop a product, to have a very clear demographic of who you're targeting, and their lifestyle is going to be key, so we can make sure we understand their skin profile the best and be able to address it with the most targeted product possible.
Yeah, that's very interesting about the scalp. I know that Larry Weiss, in terms of Skin Biome, the research in terms of people in very remote agrarian lifestyles that have a very different microbiome, and they believe it might be, environmental exposure. Do you believe that the scalp may be different when it comes to ethnicity because of hair structure? So maybe the ability to capture or proliferate different bacteria that then have the ability to then colonize the scalp? Or, have you any hypotheses as to
It's still early. Yeah. I think they are like you said, I think the hair type seems to be playing a role for sure. But I believe it's also probably also the lifestyle. Yeah. Because depending on your hair type, you're not going to use the same type of product. Certain hair type barely wash their hair. They don't need to. It's a very different maintenance than someone like me who's going to wash maybe their hair 2 times, 3 times a week, when some other people only need once a month. So I think the product you use every day, the treatment you do, are also going to impact those profile. And so that's why it's very important to do that consumer research first before you dig into any type of research, to really survey your demographic, understand it the best way possible, to make sure that what you develop is going to be the right, instruction first. Yeah, because if you develop a shampoo for a certain type of hair and they need to wash twice a week with it, but they only wash once a month, it doesn't make any sense, So it's like really understanding that, the lifestyle, the product, because it's going to have a direct impact on the microbiome profile.
And do you believe in I know that in a past life, I've done some research in terms of the aging skin microbiome and maybe how to alleviate or, have a well-aging approach. What are your thoughts on maybe that emerging technology of either reversal of aging or, reducing the signs of aging through microbiome modulation? Do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible, but I think it's also, I'm not sure we need to get that technical either, like we've described, like how cleaning and not moisturizing can have such dramatic impact on your skin. Yeah. Just by being very mindful about your routine and trying to avoid the aggressor in your everyday life is going to preserve your skin moisture, your skin balance, and indirectly also preserve your microbiome. So I think that's one thing. And when you go through that dramatic shift of microbiome profile to like kind of rebalance it by using, like a sebum-like type of moisturizer, seems to be probably helping the good bacteria like Cutibacterium acnes. We've actually seen in a study that's public with a brand called One Skin.
Mm-hmm.
They've developed a custom peptide for skin longevity. They had like a lot of data, but not on microbiome. And we worked together on doing a clinical. And in that study, what we saw was the same in our research, is that when women who tended to have like a drier type of skin use their product, we actually saw a decrease of diversity when they use the product, which is what you want to see when it comes to skin aging, to kind of reverse it.
Yeah.
Because when you age, if you lose Cutibacterium acnes, you then actually increase your diversity. So that's why when you talk about microbiome diversity, you always need to put it in context. In some contexts, it's good. In some contexts, you don't want that. And when it comes to skin aging, you want to really limit the increase of diversity because you want to preserve the amount of Cutibacterium acnes. And in that study, we actually saw an increase of Cutibacterium acnes and a decrease of diversity when people with that profile were more like looking like an edge type of skin. We actually saw like a reverse impact. So
nice.
It's, it's still early research, but it's interesting pattern because it's not something we see normally when we test a regular moisturizer.
Yeah.
So that's why there's probably something special about that product.
And for anyone listening in that might want to learn more, are you publishing these or are the brands publishing them?
Yes, the brand will let them decide. Like, for example, we've done a lot of scalp research that has not been published yet, but we believe some partners, like when I talked about the different type of microbiome and scalp, will come publicly out soon. However, on the skin, all the research we've been doing that's public, we have some like a peer review publication about it that have been published. And we also try to present a lot at conferences to expose our research, especially about the clustering method and how we create those new segment type to formulate and create more personalized system that are backed by data and not just by a quiz or by like the classic segmentation of skin or scalp.
Yeah. And when thinking about the consumer products, I know you had a consumer brand for a while. What were some of the challenges that you faced in terms of the communication with the consumer?
Yeah, and that's the reason why I moved towards B2B. And I think we've all run into those issues with Moverdot as well. Like, it's always been a challenge because if you are developing your brand or product toward consumer, I think people now are more aware of the microbiome. But the challenge I had is that even if I chose not to communicate about the microbiome first, but more about minimal and sensitive skin, you need to think of a lot of education if you have a product that is like a bit more technique than like something classic, and that takes time. So you need to take it into account into your budget. It may not be an overnight success. It will take time, but you need to think that you have to build that education, that community, and to constantly repeat the same message over like months and years. And you need a lot of patience and be very good with social media and content strategy.
Yeah.
That's key. Like, as scientist, I was more onto my, formula and clinical tests. But the truth is that once you launch, it's all about how you generate that content, generate engagement and interest for your brand. And that's a whole different type of expertise. So working with people who are extremely good at content strategy and marketing is very important, and having the budget or time allocated for that is going to be key.
Yeah. Well, in wrapping this up, what would be some resources that you would point people in if they're wanting to learn a little bit more about the microbiome, to learn more about their own skin type or products that might work for them?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, they can always go on our website, hellobio.me, where we publish not a lot, but we do publish some of the results that we have and the presentation, and be up to date about conferences. I would recommend also on LinkedIn to follow, people like you, Jennifer, people like, you said Larry Wise. There is another scientist called, I believe, Amin Zorgani, who published a lot of content about the microbiome, trying to find those key opinion leaders in the microbiome to be able to be up to date about publication, because it's hard to keep track on everything that's happening. Yeah. But LinkedIn, I believe, is a good resource for that. And there are also different groups that exist, and if they can to make it to the microbiome conference as well, there are often some in like San Diego, Boston, that are organized. I would recommend also to go there to kind of get a first sense about about microbiome.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This was very insightful. I appreciate your time. And we hope to see you on some subsequent episodes with maybe some brand new data for us to review.
Yes. Thank you.